I'd like to thank all the organizers of Friends of BC Archives Talk Series for inviting me, especially Wendy Whitfire and Bain, who I know best. Hello, Angie, if you're out there. I'm glad to see everyone, some familiar faces and new faces here, and hello to folks online. Before I get started, I'm saying I'm really glad to be in Victoria. It's one of my favorite places to come. I grew up in Seattle, came here a lot as a kid, and now in my current job, I've been out here about 7 or 8 times in the last 10 years or so, such that I think we should build a APS West Coast field office in here. I'm only half joking, so I love being here. So thank you for your hospitality. So a little bit about me as we lead into it. My family, my mom's side comes from Scotland, a place called Perth in Scotland, and came to this continent via a place. This is a little off. This image just got shifted, but they moved to a place near what's now Sarnia First Nation in Ontario before coming up to Puget Sound area, Seattle, on territory of Lushootseed speaking Coast Salish folks. So where I grew up was about a straight canoe shot across the sound from the Suquamish Reservation, North Seattle, where I could catch the bleed over CBC signal from Victoria, which was great. And my dad's side comes from Norway and France, and the Norwegians came to this continent through northern Minnesota on Anishinaabe country, actually on homesteading on lands in northern Minnesota that had been expropriated from the Red Bank land of Chippewa less than a decade earlier. You can kind of see the breakup of some of that here. This is a little bit about who I am, sort of how I came to this position. As I said in the intro, I'm an archivist by training. Curator is a specific term in the sense that I'm the head of the department, the head archivist for the Indigenous related collections at the library, which is one of the collection areas. But my knowledge of the collections comes from not from any particular research I do, because I don't come from I came from English literature and decided I'd rather spend all my time in the library. So what I'm here to share today is thanks to knowledge that's been guidance I've been given by a lot of people, and informed by just getting thousands of requests over the years, predominantly from Indigenous communities, and kind of seeing from that ways to bring forward better resources, better policies, responsiveness, and so forth. I just came here from Alaska. Part of my job as an archivist is somewhat unusual in that I go out, travel around a lot. I'm on the road about a month to a month and a half a year, per year, and through places all over the continent. Now I was just up in Alaska, which was wonderful, meeting some folks there I've been trying to connect with, meet some new faces, and I'm glad to be in Victoria now. So I'm out and about a lot. What I want to do is give you a little bit of an outline of what I'll be talking about. This is partly to keep me on track, and it's also if I'm yammering on a little bit long, you at least kind of know how far it is till the light at the end of the tunnel. This will give you a sense of what the setting is, what is the APS. To some folks here, it's very familiar, some folks it's brand new. And it is an unusual sounding name for a place that, when you think of archives of Indigenous materials, the name American Philosophical Society doesn't sound like a place that would have that kind of material. So I'll give a little background on that and the center that I run. And in the heart of it, we'll get to how to find and access materials. We'll do some pretty direct run-throughs of just how you kind of find things to give you a little flavor of that, and how to request them. We'll look at a few highlights of prominent collections from British Columbia, again, to give you a taste of some variety of things, some well-known things, and some other things that you might not know about. Funding, ways to, that's another way to access materials. And if I keep myself on track, be able to share a few stories at the end of some variety of things we've been doing with folks from around the continent. I also like to say what I'm not really going to be covering, because in putting together a talk like this, there's 1,000 things I'd like to say. But I want to gesture towards these things as topics that I'm very glad to talk about, even though I didn't kind of get a lot of space in this presentation. So a little bit of background, the history of the APS collections, how they came about over the years, over the centuries, current way that we're growing the collections, how we deal with restrictions and culturally sensitive information. We have a document called Protocols for Treatment of Indigenous Materials that is on the website that talks a lot about that. It's an area where we do a lot of work. I'm going to be featuring a particular reference guide catalog to the collections, but there are some other ones for getting at other kinds of materials. And in picking some stories to share, there's a ton that I've left out, but maybe some other anecdotes might come to mind depending on what the questions are. But the first thing I like to say, part of access is if we have really good reference resources and good cataloging metadata, it doesn't really matter that much if it seems like you can't go and ask the place. So the APS library building where I work at, if you were to make an encyclopedia entry for a colonial archive, and you needed like an emblematic image, this works very well. And it kind of doesn't speak very well as a welcoming presence with the Greek columns and Benjamin Franklin wearing a toga on the front, and so forth. So a part of the permanent responsibility of APS and what we're trying to bring through our center is that this is a thing to be constantly worked on. And part of that is through putting a face to the place as well. So my mentor was this guy, Tim Powell, who taught me and who worked with together for about 10 years. And so what's behind what I'm trying to do is try to continue the push that he gave to all this, which was to be a human being and be a friendly person. And that's one component of reference and outreach and all that. It's all fundamentally about interpersonal interactions. And so this is the context of this was from when we were working with, starting to work with Six Nations of the Grand River on an archiving project, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. And I also want to acknowledge a lot of people who have taught me and the center from a lot of communities. There's a gazillion people to mention, but especially want to acknowledge some people who've passed who were especially important and generous with their time over the years. Wendy Bissell from Tuscarora Nation, Roger Roulette, who's Ojibwe on the right, on the bottom left, TJ Holland, Eastern Band of Cherokee, Wade Akins from Penobscot, and Larry Aiken, Leech Lake, Ojibwe. There are many others, but if there's any good ideas in what we do, it's because of the patience and good advice of people like this, and the many others who I would like to list, but not right now. So what is the APS? So the APS was founded in 1743 in Philadelphia, Lenapehoking, the homeland of the Lenape peoples. So it was founded before the United States was founded. So the American in the title refers to the continent. We're not talking about the country. So when we talk about the collections at the APS, we're thinking on that level. So working with people in Canada or Mexico is very natural. It's pretty much roughly a third of the collections are from Canada, roughly a third are from the US, roughly a third are from Mexico South. So it's a continental scale, which is one thing I like to emphasize. It's one of the largest, yes, and one of the earliest archives. Without going into boring detail about the history of the APS, one of the early, in addition to being next door to Independence Hall, where the Declaration of Independence was made, it was, and where Philadelphia was the first capital of the United States. APS is literally next door to that. Some of the early presidents of the APS were presidents of the United States, such as Thomas Jefferson. And some of these early figures had interest in understanding how native languages worked to try to understand how those histories, the interrelationship among native groups, partly for scientific interest, but partly for military intelligence also. This was part of Jefferson's purpose. But when you fast forward ahead into the early 19th century, first few decades of that, it started to be headed up by people who were more what we would think of as linguists now. And it became the primary place in North America for among settler institutions for people studying indigenous languages. And it essentially became the first archive. I could be corrected on that, but certainly one of the earliest in the sense that the people who ran this thing called the Historical and Literary Committee said we shouldn't have to go to Thomas Jefferson's house to see all his manuscripts, languages, they should all be in a common place. So when you fast forward to the beginning of the 20th century and the founding of anthropology and linguistics as professional disciplines, and the huge explosion of people doing anthropologists, ethnographers, linguists doing field work all over the continent, often right on the tails of the expansion of Canada, US colonial states, and resource industries. That huge explosion of documentation in the early 20th century, there were really no archives taking that in beyond the things that they just funded. The APS became the first archive to sort of take things from everywhere, and there was a lot of material that then got grouped together. And so since then, it's continued to grow through the present day. British Columbia is an especially prominent area of the collections, for a big reason of which is because Franz Boas, who's did so much work in British Columbia and was responsible for doing a lot of this gathering together of other people's materials. His materials are predominantly at the APS fieldwork materials. So there's a lot here. So it is, I'm really glad to be able to do this talk here because for folks in well, really many parts of the continent, but here certainly, a place called the American Philosophical Society, plus it being in a quite distant place, doesn't seem intuitively like a place one would go look for materials from here. So I'm glad to make it a little bit more well-known. What I do is I'm the head of our Center for Native American Indigenous Research. This is a permanent department in the library for anyone wanting to interact with Indigenous related collections. There are two other collection areas at the APS. One is early American history, colonial history, and the history of the natural sciences, especially because the philosophical in the title means in the 1700s, what we would call natural sciences, they would call natural philosophy. So it's in that sense what the philosophical is. So I'm the head archivist for the Indigenous related collections. And yet our center is the main contact for anyone wanting to interact with these materials. The majority of requests we get are from Indigenous communities directly. That's both individual people saying, I Googled my uncle's name, I Googled my grandma's name, I came across this photograph, this recording, how do I access it? As well as community entities of various kinds. This has been increasing year after year. We now have get about 8 or 9 times as many requests as we did a decade ago. Staffing has not increased 8 or 9 times over a decade, so it's been tricky to keep up with this, but we're trying our very best. Some of the Indigenous community counterparts that we work with are a variety of kinds of entities, from cultural centers and archives are sort of counterpart folks in communities. Lots of different kinds of government departments of all sorts, as well as traditional governance, because there are some materials that are more under the purview of traditional governance leadership. Then, as I said, a lot of individual community members. Now, in working with folks from throughout the continent, from Arctic to Central America, there's a lot of kinds of governance structures, ways of doing things, protocols, and so forth. So we are not experts in anyone's language or culture, but I think we have thanks to the guidance of a lot of those people I mentioned earlier, I've been learning this adaptability to these different situations so that we can not have a sort of one-size-fits-all approach to things. So yeah, continental scale is how we think of it. And over the last 10 years or so, we've worked with about 215 different community entities. This is not representing for those individual people, researchers I mentioned. This is not, I made this last year, this is missing some more recent ones in the last year I wrote it down. In the last year, there's new places we've been in touch with in DC, California, Chihuahua in northern Mexico, Guatemala, Michigan, New Mexico, New York State, Oklahoma, Ontario, Quebec, Saskatchewan, Sonora, and Texas. So we're trying hard to keep up with this. The trouble with this kind of representation of it, though, is this is very abstract. It's kind of statistical looking and kind of cold, and it doesn't really show the stories behind all these individual things. And it kind of can also give off the vibe of like, look at how many relationships we've collected, which is not the intention. So that's why I want to bring forward as we go some more examples of work we've done and the sort of many people in all these places. What's in the collections is a wide variety of archival materials, manuscripts, audiovisual stuff. A lot of more recent stuff is born digital. There's more newly arrived audio that hasn't been digitized yet, but most of it is on hand. Photographs, a lot of printed materials, and a lot of like local, hard to find publications, ephemera, things like that. So I mentioned one guide I won't show here is you have guide to printed materials. It would be the way you would find a lot of that kind of stuff. Glad to share info on that. And it dates from very early to present day. As I said, throughout the continent, there are some things from adjacent regions as well, and a lot of languages. More kind of recent kinds of things that we're adding to the collections are things from born digital or oral histories, community newspapers, screen prints, artwork, all sorts of stuff. So this is just to give you a little flavor of some of the curator stuff that I do is finding things like this and enhancing the sort of broader range of what is in the collection. You write to us, please write to us. These are some of the friendly folks who may write you back on various things. That's the four of us. We used to be just two. Over the last couple of years, four folks now. A big thing we do that is not really apparent from what you might see from the website is a ton of digitization. Vast majority of this is for Indigenous community requests. We digitize materials for free for Indigenous community requests. Want that to be known. These are, we have a large backlog of stuff that should be put online. Some of the stuff we scan, we don't put online for general public use because it's not all appropriate for that. You do have PDFs or stuff that is scanned and can be sent and shared. So on the finding aids and guides, you may not, there's some stuff you will come across, you'll see links to digitized viewable things, but there's a lot more that is digitized, but you wouldn't get an indication of that. So when you make a request, we might just have something on hand as well. And that's Karen working the scanner basically every day. So finding and requesting stuff. This is an overall thing I want to convey. If you have one takeaway from the talk, it's this. So we'll look at the Indigenous subject guide as the sort of what I would recommend as the starting point for looking for materials. This is how to write to us at CNR, our contact information. That's my office phone number. To chat on the phone if that's better for folks. We'll look through some the guides here. if you find stuff, write to us, because we do have systems where you can kind of place an automated request, and it will go through in our system, and we'll see that someone requested something. But it's very helpful if you write to us also to know what your work, even if you find something like, yep, this looks good. If you say, hey, I placed a request and whatever question you have, and if you let us know what you're working on, there might be other things where we could say, oh, there's an uncatalogued thing over here you wouldn't have known about. We can let you know. If you don't find stuff you're looking for and you're kind of thinking you might, also let us know, because there's a lot of reasons it might not be apparent. I'd be glad to talk about that. There's all sorts of reasons why, beyond being uncatalogued, why it might be hard to zero in on something you might have a hunch would be there. So these yeah, I'm glad to be in touch. This is what we do. So our Indigenous subject guide, this is the main URL for it. It's also one of my colleagues let me use some of her slides, which she does great QR codes for everything. So all the QR codes are thanks to Ruth. If those are your preferred way to pull things up. So the Indigenous subject guide was created to be, because we were getting in the early years a lot of requests from communities where the main request would be like, could I just see a list of everything in my language or my community? And although even if things were cataloged, when you would do a search, you would get like the results you might get, it would be a little unintelligible sometimes why you were getting some results. You might say, be searching for Palton, and you get a result, one that says, has a title that says that word in it. And then you get another result that says the so-and-so papers, and then you go to that collection and you find this giant list, and it's unclear where you should look for that thing, why you got the results. So the subject guide is meant to be designed to especially get started through that lens. So there's a variety of ways to browse materials. So one is through these headings we have as browse culture, browse language. These will get you to listings of, in each respective case, listings of collections that have materials in that language or about that culture or people. And we'll see an example of that as we go here. A typical kind of entry looks like this. So ACLS collection is a prominent collection I'll talk more about in a minute. But this is just saying in this giant collection, the Dighitan stuff is here. So it's giving you some information like including alternate spellings. So if someone say types in Nootka, it's going to take them to Nuchalnuth, or if you have alternate spellings, historical things. We try to incorporate a lot of that. There's information not just on, say, the anthropologist or linguist who did it, but if there's the name of a speaker or a person who gave the information, that's kind of apparent in there. We put that in there as well. This is a pretty simple one. It says there's this one thing, and it's in this one section, and look for that. If there's a collection that has, 3 or 4 things, this description will give you say there's this thing and this thing, this thing. If it's a collection where there's a lot of stuff, it will be more summarized in a paragraph that says, in this section of the collection, there's this kind of thing. In another section, there's this kind of thing. So that when you jump to this link at the bottom of these, let's say go to collection, this is another example, you have a little sense of where to look when you get kicked over to that finding. So on the left-hand side of these listings, you see these columns of other kinds of stuff, names. One is types. If you're trying to zero in on a certain kinds of things, like say you want to see just listings that have audio recordings, if you click on something on that site, it will just narrow your results down to those particular ones. So that's what you can use the stuff on the left-hand side if it's relevant to what you're doing. We'll get back to an example of how you when you finally get to your collection finding aid to see the materials, when you find something you're looking for, you'll click on this EON request button, which is EON is our request system. So you just set up a registration account, and will let you know the status of your request. When it's ready to be downloaded, you can do it through there. I'll basically be explaining everything that's said on here, but for audio materials, we have set up a different audio password for that, but we'll get that set up for you. We've just migrated to a new system, so occasionally there are little like broken links or missing buttons or stuff. If you encounter something, fingers crossed you don't, but just send us an email, and there are little quirky things, bugs that are being worked out, but you may not, hopefully not encounter any of those. On the subject guide, one of the big things that jumps out to people is the map. This is the broadest view, but as you zoom in more closely, there's a couple of looks at DC itself. This is southern half, and we'll skip to the north in a minute. So the map is useful, but it's very important to understand that it's not comprehensive of everything in collections. This shows where there are materials, like a notebook that says it was recorded in Cranbrook. You say, okay, then we'll put a dot there on that location that will then take you to the listing where you can find that thing. But there are lots of materials that you can't really put a dot on the map. Like if I have a notebook we have a field notebook that says Ojibwe notebook number 1, and it doesn't say where the community is, that's not going to show up on the map. Or if you have a map, an archival map, it's not going to show up on the map. But this is so these are good ways to bring to the surface certain collections. But if you are looking at a particular location and you do not see a marker there, that doesn't necessarily mean there isn't something from there. It just may not be as apparent in the materials. But people, especially from communities who have expertise, may be able to tell. Like for a notebook might have the name of a person, and they're like, oh, that person was from so-and-so. Or we had a community come by, folks who work with Umatilla in Oregon, and they looked at this one story, and there's nothing in the story to indicate the location, but they said, oh, this story is about this mountain right here. So there is possibility to drill in on that, especially with photographs, which are often not well identified. So just take that to heart when using the map to not conclude that something isn't there if it's marked. So if you click on one of these dots, one of these markers, you then get a listing that it'll just take you to one of those listings like that. And then you would, we'll just do one more run through of how to do the request. You go to the go to collection button. That's going to take you to the finding aid collection guide for that. This is the particular very large comment collection that a lot of people will come across and looking for DC materials. And you're going to see on the right-hand side, there's this navigation thing that will take you to different sections. You think of the finding aid collection guide, it's essentially one huge list. The things on the right is taking you to different sort of points on the list. Essentially, it's the table of contents. So in this case, we're going to go over there, and what it said on the Heisla thing, it said that it is in the Chinook section. That's an old cataloging thing that's odd because it's within a collection that field notebooks that are primarily Chinookan languages. But this is a field notebook that Boaz did in a bunch of places. So we're down there, we're going to click on that particular thing we were looking for, and then it gives you an actual listing of that particular individual thing. Going to click on the EON request button. If you can set up the account then, or you can, if you already have one, it will automatically fill it all the information in. You scroll down, If you want to get a copy, you click the request photo duplication button. And you go to the bottom, you hit submit request, and it'll say your request went through, and tell you the status of it. So that's the basic run through that. And if you encounter any glitches or weird stuff along the way, like I said, just write to us. We can also do stuff manually, or you can also write to us and say, I'm just looking for, and describe what you're looking for. Like, I'm looking for all recordings you have in X language, or if it's a little tedious to find what you're looking for, you don't have to request every individual thing. You can just explain, and we can also say, oh, this, I think this might be the thing. What about this? So whatever works for you. So a little sampling of some prominent DC collections. Again, this is just a taste. But with the way that archival collections work, it's so much centered around the papers of so-and-so and the papers of so-and-so. So like I was saying with the subject guide, we created that to be a way that you can get it through language terms or culture terms, or even place names or things like that. What I'm going to be showing here is a lot of sort of prominent individuals who brought together a lot of information. But this is just to give you a variety of angles where you can come at locating materials. But this is not a comprehensive list, but this is just a lot of the BC Indigenous peoples and languages that are in the collections. There's some redundancy in this list in terms of broader terms, narrower terms, language terms, and nation terms. But this is just to give one really big overview from that angle. I mentioned this ACLS collection. I want to note what this is, because if you see this in the results, what this is when it used to be called the Franz Boas Collection for American Indian Linguistics. When Boas, at the end of his life, last few months of his life, I think, in 1942, started writing to all of his students and colleagues and saying that there's all these, we all have these unpublished manuscripts and notes and so forth. We should gather them all together in one place. He was shopping around for places to do that. APS became the place where those materials were taken and added to the collections. So that's what this collection is. It got renamed ACLS for a very boring reason later on. But that's, if you see it, that's what this is. And it's a very huge collection. It has a lot of the core fieldwork materials from that time period. A very prominent name, of course, is James Tate, who did work throughout BC, not so much the coast, but throughout, especially the interior, vast numbers of communities and many, many years. Of course, Mindy's great book is a great coverage of that, of his career and work and people he worked with. I've got a very heavily annotated copy that's very helpful in helping with requests. There's a huge range of materials among Tate. There's his annotated maps, which are all digitized, which are very interesting, the notes that go with it. Tons of his notes, especially working in Mkutapmuk, Secwepemc folks, especially. There are some Tate materials that are not at APS, like the Talton notes are at Gatineau, Canadian Museum of History. Some of the things, his photographs and audio recordings are there at APS, but basically nearly all of the work he did for Boas is at the APS. It's often quite jumbled together, but we are more and more from talking to people, I think getting a lot better information about how to zero in on things. The other great companion book on tape that recently came out, this great work that Andrea, Angie, John, Sarah, and Andy did annotating all the Boaz and Hunt letters, as well as the Boaz and Kate letters at APS as well as at other places. So they're all transcribed in this book. But at the APS, you can also view the digitized originals if you would like to. Mercifully, he has pretty good handwriting, so it's not that hard to get around it. We also created, or I created this is before the book came out, sort of real basic summaries of a lot of the letters, most of the letters with some tagging of nations, tribes, places. It's not comprehensive, but it's another sort of option for navigating the digitized materials. I also have it in a PDF form. We'll paste that if you'd like to that. This isn't on the digital library, but just write to me. I'll send you the PDF and you can share it with people. And these links will take you to the letters. George Hunt materials, it's a very similar situation. Another person with whom Boaz worked primarily through correspondence for a long, long period. Also thousands and thousands of pages. And a diverse range of materials, again, predominantly manuscript materials. There's a few photographs, but not very many. The audio is not at APS. Huge range of material, often difficult to navigate because Boaz seemed to have jumbled things around and or archivists when it arrived at APS. It's a little bit difficult to sort of piece together the logic of that. But for some of the more complex sections, we do start to have sort of table of contents indexes to them to sort of give a little bit more of a way into finding things. I also created a similar guide for the Boaz Hunt letters, which also give like just general summaries, kind of names of tribes and places that were kind of apparent, and sometimes links to materials mentioned in the letters that these letters are things for both Boaz and for both the Hunt letters and the Tate letters. They often say, "Dear Dr. Boaz, I am sending here with 20 pages about the thing you last asked about," and then they go on. The thing that they sent is over in the ACLS collection. The letters are in the Franz Boas collection, with a few exceptions. So they interrelate, and we're also working with communities and scholars to try to understand a bit of these sort of cross-reference across these things too. Of course, Franz Boas, I won't go into the detail of all his materials, but it's important to note there are 6 different Franz Boas collections at the APS. These are the different ones. I have a PDF guide to these that sort of explains different kinds of things that are in each. One is all correspondence and is digitized. Other ones have little correspondence or this kind of thing, but not this kind of thing. So if you'd like that sort of way to navigate through that, I have that information. There's also, so those are very famous kind of prominent materials. There's a lot of other stuff though. I want to also let that be a takeaway. There are earlier materials such as in the early 19th century sort of travels, a lot like natural historians who are going all over the continent, you know, observing birds and this and that, and also writing down word lists and interacting with bird traders and so forth. There are documents like that. From BC, there's a lot of audio material, especially from the sort of latter half of the 20th century. It's all digitized. Some of the more recent stuff that's more born digital, contemporary documentation work with folks in communities is might not be cataloged yet. There's a lot of photo albums of people, a lot of travelers, and more recent linguistic stuff. So there's a collection you might come across called the Phillips Fund, which is kind of like the ACLS collection, but sort of for the second half of the 20th century onward. It's a fund that the APS has had since 1947 to fund field work, especially linguistic work throughout North America. There's also a lot of uncatalogued stuff. There's still materials coming into the collections. So here's a little taste of a few things. This one we got from a book dealer 3 weeks ago. So John Chisholm, I don't know much about him. He was a descendant of someone in the Northwest Company. And he lived out somewhere out east. And he took a couple of trips, railroad trips out west. One, he kind of went through the like route through like Montana and across that, whatever, all my railroads mixed up, through Washington and then up into BC and back. 27, he went across Canada, and there's a lot of notes from BC and a lot of notes of he wasn't an anthropologist or ethnologist, but there's a lot of notes about Native people in various places. The description from the folks who sold it have some breakdown of a lot of these. Just getting to know this, but it's sort of not a particularly famous person or something, but they're I don't know the significance of the information in here, as with all of the uncatalogued stuff here, but it's sort of, I want to let people know that it exists, and then people can assess if it's useful. There's this very interesting photo album. This guy named Richard Bullock, who was again some rich Easterner, he took a hunting trip out to Telegraph Creek, Tahltan country, 1915. The same, I think, tape was there in Telegraph Creek that same year. So this is a photo album. They wrote within the, there's also a typescript of like describing this hunting trip, but there's also photographs of people, and some of the Tahltan people in there are people that Tate worked with in the same year. I'm forgetting the names of the specific people, but they're great photos. The one on the left, if they had Instagram in 1915, this would be a great Instagram picture. There's these two and a couple more here. I think there may be a handful more beyond that, but this is, we got this about a couple years ago, and it hasn't been cataloged yet, but hopefully soon, but we can also scan it even if it isn't cataloged yet. There's also this collection, there's a lot of like photographs of people like tourists and stuff. This is someone who was traveling up to Alaska, but was passing through, in this case, Alert Bay on the right and Prince Rupert on the left, taking photographs of various things. These are lantern slides. It's around 1910 or so. There's not a lot of these, but again, not any prominent names, just some random 1910 tourists. Again, I have no idea if they're significant or not, but we want people to know about them, and they can take a look and decide what would be useful. So funding. I can come back to this in Q&A and share more information, but we have a lot of different funding resources. The Indigenous Community Research Fund is an endowment funded fund, so it's not a grant, it's a permanent fund that's meant to support, especially Indigenous communities wanting to come to APS to do research. Often people want to come in groups, so this is also meant to support that. It has a certain amount of money available every year that we use until it's expended, and then resets in January, and there's more money available. It's a rolling deadline. There's no write in. It's kind of as people come in. You don't have to, this and Digital Knowledge Sharing Fellowship, you do not have to have any academic degrees or affiliations or anything of the sort to do that, to apply for these. They are open. The Indigenous Community Research Fund is sort of, we work with people to determine the budget they need. Say 4 people traveling from Alaska versus 1 person driving from New York State, very different budgetary needs. So we kind of model that on what people want to do. Digital Knowledge Sharing Fellowships is part of this Native American Scholars Initiative program, which funds people, especially doing digital projects involving archival materials. There's an undergraduate internship. And there's also short-term, like month-long fellowships for people more in sort of grad school or professor types of research trips. There are long-term ones as well, pre-doctoral and postdoctoral. The Scholars Initiative ones we're at the end of the funding cycle for that. We're hoping to get it reset this coming year. This coming round, we don't have those two, but there's this Friends of the APS pre-doctoral fellowship, which is for any topic area. The person who has it right now is a Maya woman from Yucatan, who's a linguist, for example. So the application for these just opened up as well. Funding details, QR code. I can also direct you to this. We'll get to the end here too, because I want to leave some time for a Q&A, but in working with people over the years, there's a lot of different sort of examples of communities working with archival materials in ways that the APS never would have thought of, and a lot of projects and collaborations, relationships that come out of that over the years. A very kind of common, or especially right down the middle kind of thing that we do is working with community archives. So at Six Nations Polytech, there's this place, the Deo Hahage Indigenous Knowledge Center, which is their archive for Grand River. And we've been working with them for 10 some years now to digitize all the stuff that's Hodin was showing you, especially from Grand River, which is a ton of material. And then we work with them through them for questions about access to sensitive materials, because there are some like ceremonial materials from there. And they also, I got some messages over the last week on corrections to some identification of stuff. So there's a lot of back and forth. We worked with a lot of folks in the Pakwakwa communities. There are a couple of guys, Hereditary Chiefs Mike Willie and Ryan Nicholson, who are archives nerds. I mean that in I am one too. And they had an idea of how could we make that George Hunt kind of material a little more accessible. They suggested selecting some materials to print off in books and then give them away at pop options. So we were able to do that a couple of years. That's an idea we never would have come up with, and even if we had, we never would have been able to do that without their suggestion and invitation. And that, I think, was the biggest single increase to access to that material kind of in one fell swoop a couple years in a row. So we learned a ton from that about ways that people might interact with materials and get together around materials. The last one, which I'm not going to be able to get into all of these, but the last one I'll mention is about this one on the left, the Tunica Biloxi tribe. We're working with them. They're in Louisiana, and there's a very large body of materials with this gentleman, Sosostri Uchiga, who is the last known speaker of the language, recorded by Mary Haas, the linguist in the 1930s. And we've done a multi-year project, which has involved mainly tribal members transcribing the notebooks, because this is the largest body of information about Tunica language, and they've been using it for a long time to develop pedagogical materials. They have now like teaching teachers and like proficiency tests and things like that. So we've been developing this website to be a landing page where anyone wanting to interact with the Tunica materials at APS can do it through this page, which includes sections. Yeah, you can sort of dive into different parts of the notebooks, but it includes sections where it has excerpts of interviews with community members talking about various things they find important, background information, kind of things that relate to the notebooks, contemporary things going on of various kinds. So we're hoping that this is like 99% done, so that as this gets out there, it could be hopefully an example of other kinds of parallel kinds of projects that people might want to do in other places. I think there's a lot of potential there. We have programs, just know about it. Whole bunch of talk series and so forth, if that would be useful to you. Community projects, academic things, all sorts of things. You've got a variety of that kind of stuff. Glad to talk more about that. But and we have a YouTube channel, but I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for your kindness in listening to me. Thank you.